Hello and welcome to Future Procurement. My name is Robert Freeman and today is a very, very important day for me as a host of this podcast. I want to introduce a very special guest, Philip Ideson. Hello, Philip. Welcome to our podcast.
Thank you very much, and you're too kind.
Why Philip is so special guest for me, I just want to share with our listeners. He is one who inspired me to start blogging in the beginning and then interviews for Future Procurement podcasts. So these discussions around procurement with the thought leaders and the people from the different areas, from supply chain management and from procurement. It was you, Philip, who actually inspired me. And it was your podcast, which I want to give a shout out, Art of Procurement. So let me start by saying a big thank you for inspiring me, actually.
Well, thank you again, for those words, and it makes me so happy that, to have that impact, because I see that we're all just we're one community, and I was inspired by people who did this before me, so I wasn't necessarily reinventing the wheel or anything doing what I was, but I looked at other people and thought, why not? I'm going to put myself out there, and if we can continue that, and the more that we do that collectively, just builds kind of bigger exposure to all of us of some of the great things that certain companies or individuals, professionals are all working on, so we can all kind of share and learn from each other.
Great. We will for sure come back to discussing your podcast and your current activities and your thoughts about building the community. I know that you have many ideas around that. But for now, Philip, if I can ask you to introduce yourself to our listeners who don't know you. And please start with telling your background.
Yeah, so I'll try and keep it as short as possible. My background is pretty much procurement from day one of my career. And, like many of the people that I talk to, it's a profession that there was never any aspiration that, one day I want to be in procurement. It was, I joined the graduate scheme for Ford Motor Company in the UK, and they said, the first job we're going to put you in, the first rotation is in this purchasing department, and you're going to be a buyer. I'm like, okay, I have no idea what that is, but I'll take it. And I loved it. I never went on another rotation. It was something about, I think, the responsibility at a young age. It was the complexity, the fact that every day is certainly different. And I just really loved working with peers and suppliers, across cultures, and having the ability to go and travel and see them. So I was kind of hooked from day one. And I've stayed in the profession in some way, shape or form ever since then, which is now, 16, 17 years, which is crazy to think about. On the direct side, I moved into indirects. I've been within sourcing, supplier management, risk management. I've been on the buy side. I've been on the sell side as managing procurement outsourcing engagements. I've lived in India for a while. I managed a captive shared service KPO office in Chennai in South India back 10 years ago. Wow. When we were really just starting to think about how can we use shared service centers to take some of the load off our teams in higher cost locations, but also how can we start to think about using data and analytics in ways that we hadn't done before. So it's been a journey that hasn't had a defined direction. I then, a couple of years ago, just decided, I've always harbored this ambition to go and do something on my own. Why not? Let's go and try something and see where it takes me, and kind of put everything on the line. It's a big risk in doing that, but it was something that I felt I wanted to do, and if I didn't, I'd always probably look back and regret not trying and doing something.
Phil, tell me what motivated you back then when you decided to leave the corporate job and start in your own business. And how does it feel now? I mean, how did it feel that time, and how does it feel now?
It probably feels the same now as it did then, and it's both exciting and scary at the same time. I'm not sure that that's changed. I'd been in a number of roles, over the course of the previous few years before I decided to make the call to leave. And, in each one of them, what really motivated me the most was change. and helping to drive change and transformation. And so I would go into roles where there was always a change and a transformational element. But then once you got to a steady state, I was always interested in kind of finding, okay, where can I have the biggest impact? And I wasn't sure that was in a steady state was where I could have the biggest impact. So I was always looking at how can I, kind of engineer or manufacture this role where I can be constantly thinking about how we can evolve and not necessarily change for change's sake, but how can we just have a bigger impact on the organizations that we work for. And I felt that within a typical organization, it was a little bit of it was down to the organization themselves whether you had those opportunities, and in some you did and in some you didn't. I think that there's also a vision that I had, and we'll see how that comes to pass, on the fact that I think a lot of the nature of work is changing. The nature of work is changing so that there will be larger use of independent subject matter experts, and organizations will look to become more agile and have lower fixed costs. And I think that what we do, I just felt that this was an opportunity for me to maybe go and take advantage of that, but also pursue a career that had multiple different revenue sources as opposed to being reliant on a single employer.
That's very interesting. Can you stop here for a while and say, first of all, I want to just emphasize these words that you said. The thing that triggered you said, was it wish to change, or was it the belief that you need to change? I mean,
for me, I think that it's a little bit of both. So partly it's a desire to always be involved in change in some way, shape, or form, in my daily work. But also, I really strongly believe in, continuing to push yourself to do things that are uncomfortable, because that's the only way that you learn as an individual. And, it's easy to get complacent and comfortable in a corporate role where, you're doing very well, but it's not necessarily challenging. And so I wanted to go and seek opportunities to be challenged and challenge myself and put myself in uncomfortable positions, frankly, because that's just the way that I'm motivated to learn.
And it's not everybody probably who is like you.
No, I feel like I need that as the inspiration to go and learn new things and learn new skills, because otherwise and I've always found it very easy to not necessarily invest in my own self-development when I'm in a role that I'm comfortable with.
Interesting. And the second thing that I took for myself here in the notes was the fact that you said that you have seen that you can make a bigger impact.
Yeah, and that's important. That's just, it's part of my being. My why is in helping to, one, do everything that I can to, and I'm not pretending by any stretch of the imagination that I have all the ideas. It's bringing ideas that other people have that are smarter than me, so we can all learn from them. But that can help us have a greater impact on our companies, but also as individuals. What is it that how can we feel fulfilled in the work that we do, and how can I help in any small little part of what I do, listeners of the Art of Procurement to be more fulfilled in their work by working on things, or by trying new things, or considering new ideas, so that it takes away from some of the monotony of the day to day.
Fantastic. It triggers so many thoughts in my head right now, and I for sure will have some food for reflecting onto what you said, and it very much vibrates together with my ideas, so that's why I was kind of emphasizing these two things. You
mentioned about how does it feel, and it is a roller coaster, and I know it's really cliche,
exactly,
but I still find that I'm 2.5, 3 years in, and there's good times and there's difficult times, and it's I think we all the perception that we give, if people just engage with the content or with social media or whatever it may be, everything can look like it's being successful, or that you only share the good things, you don't share the difficult things. But behind the scenes is obviously there's a lot of challenge that comes in doing something like this, because for a number of different reasons. And so there is that roller coaster. And there's down days and there's up days, but I don't think I would change it.
Interesting. But what is even more interesting that in your corporate career, probably it was also some feeling of not being fulfilled.
Yes, yeah.
So what is worse? What is bad? I don't know.
I know it's interesting. It's like when I was in the corporate career, it was like, how can I really have an impact because I'm a small cog in a much larger wheel. And then when you're working for yourself, it's more, it's hard to be the one that makes all the decisions, because what if those decisions aren't the right decisions? So there's definitely, it's kind of, you're going to have difficulty. There's going to be challenges whichever side you're on. And it's, I think, based on your own individual makeup, which one you excel or you thrive in.
Interesting. Okay, maybe I can go on with this discussion forever, and probably so are you. But moving on to your current activities today, how you describe your activities that you provide in the access to procurement and category subject matter expertise on demand and on activity basis. Can you elaborate a little bit more and explain what it means actually? How to understand what it is, and how can our listeners maybe benefit from the things you are providing? I mean,
yeah, absolutely. So Palambridge is the name of the business, which is something that I set up or co-founded about 9 months ago, although it was probably 6 or 7 years in the making, just based on the experiences I had as as a head of procurement, and then within procurement outsourcing, of how the challenge that I always had was, how can I access experts to help me at the points of like the sourcing and the category management continuum or process where the most value is created. So think about when you're actually looking at a category for the first time, or when you're trying to bring in supply market insights that you might not have access to internally, or when a supplier, you're going through a negotiation, you want to make sure you're asking the right questions in the RFP, but also when a supplier responds, how do you push back on that? And typically, most companies, the way they would access that is you have your own internal teams, but if you're anything but the largest 50 companies in the world, it's probably more a generalist who is doing that than a specialist. And I don't say that to say anything bad about being a generalist, because that's what I was. That was where I deliberately took my career. I wanted to be not be specifically linked or an expert in one category, but across multiple categories. So there's nothing wrong with that. But it means that it's sometimes more difficult to get very specific insights that help you drive better results, whatever the result is that you're seeking to achieve. You can't access that internally. You go external. So you go external, you hire a procurement outsourcing company who, will come in and offer a 3-year deal or a 2-year deal or a 5-year deal or whatever, but it's very expensive. Or you look to hire an individual contractor and it can take you 3 months to go and find them. And then you have to, you're bringing them on for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months at a time, which is obviously very expensive. I wanted a way of it being, finding those people, those experts, and connecting them so it's like micro consulting. You only actually use them for a few hours. Now that's built within a framework of this is what an engagement looks like. But it's using them to really bring the value where you need the support or you need the help the most. So it's a lot more targeted. And then the way that we do that across then multiple different categories. So clients would work with us, and we'll be essentially bringing in the entire procurement ecosystem depending on what a particular project is. So you don't have to go out and find somebody who's an expert in this category when you need some help, and then go and find somebody who's an expert in another category when another category comes up, because the complexity of that means as an internal organization, you're probably not going to do it. And so you'll miss out on ways that you can make a bigger impact because you just don't have access to those insights. So that's really the intent of it. It's to be very highly targeted, and frankly, it became more of something that I thought there was an opportunity to create something like this based on the work with Art of Procurement, because what Art of Procurement did is it really helped me expand my own personal network. So now I have, I'm very fortunate to have a large network through the show of people who I know can help organizations that are in need. So it's a way of connecting that community with companies who have very specific problems or challenges.
Yeah, to summarize maybe in 1-2 sentences, so what is Palambridge in this perspective? I mean, what it is for a user of your services?
Yeah. So it is so Palambridge is essentially the glue that brings this ecosystem together so an organization can tap into the network and access a resource they need when they need it for a very short period of time. And what Palambridge does, or what we do through Palambridge, is that we manage all the deliverables associated with that. We take responsibility and accountability for the outcomes that person delivers. So it's not here's a person, we recommend they're a really good person, we recommend that you use them, now you're on your own. These are 3 different approaches of how you can solve the challenge that you have, and one of them maybe with an independent subject matter expert, another maybe with a boutique or a niche firm that are part of the ecosystem, and they have different price points based on what they are. But we want to give options of how you solve a challenge, and then we'll take responsibility for delivering that.
Interesting. So you, as a company, I could outsource procurement services more or less, or?
You could. So I would never recommend anybody outsource everything, and that's based on my experience in outsourcing.
Okay.
But whether the best fit is an organization that they already have some procurement capability.
Okay.
It's typically procurement capability who don't have deep subject matter experts in some of the categories that they buy. Maybe they're an expert in one thing, but something comes along and they've never bought it before. You need to talk to an expert. That's where we come in. We can connect you with an expert. We can actually help run part of a project or all of a project, and we take the accountability and the responsibility to make sure that you get what you want. It's not just based on us connecting with an individual and stepping out from the discussion. So I hate the term, but with a single throat to choke.
Interesting. Interesting. And I think for our listeners to get to know a little bit more, we will probably attach the link to your webpage where they can see a little bit more of information about Palambridge.
Thank you.
Really interesting and innovative idea. When I have seen it, it was really like, how come we don't have it yet? So
yeah, it's like the Upwork or the somebody told me it was the Uber for strategic sourcing, but it's that notion of just connecting with the right person at the right time, giving you the information that you need, and then you quickly move on to the next one.
I like it. Good, Philip. Then with changing the gears, let's talk about the topic about procurement profession as such.
Yeah.
You had a lot of interviews with thought leaders. You are having also your own procurement experience, and how would you define the challenges that you see today for procurement professionals, if there are any common challenges that you observe?
Yeah.
And then we will slowly move into the future opportunities and future potentials for procurement people. So starting with the challenges today, how would you describe them in general terms?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, but a difficult one as well, because some of it is a little bit contextual. But when I think about the highest level, I think that the biggest challenge that I observe myself, that I see in work that I do with clients and also when I talk to people, is it's kind of this ongoing quest for relevancy. So, what is our value proposition? How are we really creating value for the organizations that we work for? How are we communicating that? How are we convincing them that they are better served, or that there's value that we can bring for them over and above what they can do on their own? Because with Amazon, as an example, everybody buys all the time in their personal lives, and they expect or now feel comfortable, and say now, I think they have always felt comfortable buying in their business lives, and they see a lot of what we're doing as maybe getting in the way of that. And I think that's such a big challenge, especially, I mean, it's getting a more difficult challenge as well as it's easier for people to buy as companies who are selling are getting more advanced in the tricks that they use and the technologies that they use to connect themselves directly with people who they want to sell their services to. So I'd say that's probably the biggest challenge is continuing to be relevant or increasing the value proposition to become relevant, and to be thinking more from a customer centric perspective. I think the other thing, and so that's more at a higher level. When I think about day-to-day level,
Okay.
honestly, I think about data. How do we access good data? And it seems such an easy question, but I'm not sure that most organizations have really solved for that. And there's a lot of service providers out there who are helping to better structure the information that we have and turn it into insights. But I think that's just one of the difficulties that I observe, and maybe that's just the nature of some of the clients that I work with. But getting access to really good actionable data that helps inform us, that helps drive strategy is just a challenge that I still see. And I'm sure and I know there's a lot of things in between, but those are just two things at kind of both ends of the scale of high level and in the weeds that I see that continue to be challenges.
No, but it's very interesting observations, and honestly, I was a little bit surprised when you said the second one about the data. And do you mean here about accessibility of data?
I think there's a couple of things. One is at its most basic is that I still think a lot of companies struggle with spend analytics. Of actually understanding, this is before we even start thinking about predictive analytics, is understanding the data that you have today and making it accessible in a way that you can understand it. And then, we have an explosion of data that's available to us, turning that into insights.
Yeah, that's what I mean, because it's so lot of information everywhere. Yeah. And to me, when you say so you mean it's rather like using it in the other way, or like getting... It's
like, how do we interpret that? How do we interpret that? Well, one is getting good data. I still think getting good data.
Okay, good data. Okay.
Getting clean data, getting data that we can trust is still a difficulty. Okay. But for those that have overcome that hurdle, it's then how do we take this explosion of data we have access to and making it and turning it into insights, turning it into business strategy. And I think that we struggle, and I think it's an evolving skill set within procurement. So I talk to a lot of folks about how I really see a need for data scientists within the procurement space, so that we can better understand the information we have access to, and we can think about it in analyzing in ways that perhaps we haven't done before. Visualizing it in different ways and telling stories, using data to tell stories, things like that. I think that we've been brought up that that data is numbers on a spreadsheet, but that doesn't necessarily influence people. So I think one of the challenges we have is influencing people through information.
I like this thought a lot. And one more interesting thought for me to have on my notes and think more. I started the new short topic in my podcast, and it's called Here and Now with the hashtag. I start to use hashtags. Here and Now. So here and now, I think this last idea that you have just said, storytelling using your data. So not only having the spreadsheet, but like converting it into a story and sharing it with whoever it is, colleagues or suppliers or project group. I think this is a very, very practical advice that I can take from this thought, Philip.
I would encourage you. So I spent, and maybe this is why I'm talking about it because it's front of mind, but I spent yesterday just looking at some videos on YouTube about data visualization. Wow. and then influencing using data through the power of stories. So I'd encourage anyone to just go one of them was a TED talk about data visualization, but just go and spend a little bit of time and you really, it connects to you the power of using the information in different ways, as opposed to just sharing even the way that you visually depict it, from a newspapers that do a really good job at this, and
Exactly.
when they're building infographics,
Exactly.
it contextualizes the information that you have rather than it just being a number. And so it creates some kind of emotional or kind of connective appeal to somebody where they start to understand the message you're trying to say rather than just looking at this is a number. And it's just how do we use the insights that we have to make it more accessible, I think. And so I would definitely encourage folks to just look a little bit more into that and think about how you can differently depict the data that you're trying to sell people or that you're trying to influence people using.
All right. So for our listeners and for myself, here and now, I will probably put some music under this phrase. Data visualization, all right? Visualizing data and making an interesting story using your maybe savings or whatever deliverables of your next project. Make it in a context and make a data visualization. Interesting. Good, very clear advice. First time I remember, you now reminded me one, I will make it a very short story from Poland when I was in maybe middle of 2000s when the really experienced guy from my organization, he was putting on the PowerPoint that time the picture of the house for sale in that area where the factory was located. And he said 2 of such houses we are losing every, I couldn't say was it months or quarter of a year because of your bad quality.
Right.
So before we were saying we were connecting this just with the KPIs, and we were sending to the management the KPIs connected to all the parameters, including the cost of poor quality. And then we started to send figures like how many euro or Polish zloty we have lost due to this. And then finally, where it really made the good connection to the people at the factory was when he was showing these 2 houses for sale, and he said like 2 of them every, I don't know, period of time were losing. And then it was really triggers that made them think.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. It's that the people who the audience could contextualize or resonate with the cost of a house, whereas numbers on a spreadsheet as a part of another bunch of big numbers and even bigger numbers on a balance sheet doesn't really mean anything.
Exactly. Interesting. Philip, coming to the next topic about the future of procurement, and one of your favorite phrase is procurement profession at risk of extinction. And if you don't want to be a dinosaur and to disappear in a while, what should you develop to be a future procurement professional?
Yeah, and I think when we look at what procurement is today, there's a couple of things. Let me just step back actually and say, I think of procurement as an act. It's an act of being. It's not necessarily a function. So everybody buys. Everybody has a need to connect. A need with going and buying it from the outside. So it's not necessarily we think of procurement as a term, as a function. I think we should think about it a little bit more broader as being an act, because it may mean that at some time in the future the procurement function is going to look different than what it does, but the act and the art of procurement never actually goes away because people in the organization still need to do it. That being said, I think that technology is going to render a lot of what we do. It's going to build on a lot of what we do. A lot of tactical, transactional stuff, will probably go away, and I think that's no surprise for anybody who's listening. That will impact a lot of members of our community who aren't looking at how can they continue to develop their experiences and skill sets so that they remain relevant. And it goes back to that relevancy thing I talked about before. What is the role of procurement when technology can do, let's say, 70% of the things that we can do? And it's very much based on, in my opinion, the bringing together of innovative ideas that drive revenue, that solve difficult business challenges. It's that when you think of the Pareto, it's focusing on that 20%.
Yeah.
That's where we have the biggest impact. And it's being much smarter about how we help our organizations solve the challenges within that space, as opposed to thinking it as helping them buy what they want. We need to be helping inform them what they need based on what we know about supply markets. So it means that there's very much more focus on being I'd say a business or commercial leader rather than just a procurement leader. So it's broadening perspectives a little bit. It's about being more entrepreneurial, taking some more risks, not thinking of yourself within the confines of a procurement function, but as part of a bigger commercial group, as I mentioned before. And relationships are key. Relationships will be so important in how we influence people. So it's the softer skills. I think that, I don't know if this is controversial or not, but a lot of the technical skills are things, what I'm seeing within organizations is they're hiring people from outside of procurement to do some of these roles because they feel that there's a little bit more, they've had more exposure to different parts of the business, and then teaching the technical skills. And so that ends up with, a lot of people who don't have the depth of technical knowledge that a number of us who have grown up in the procurement function have, but they come with maybe a different mindset.
Interesting.
So it's a balance, right, in investing in technical skills, but also looking at ways that you can open the mind to other people's perspectives, or having empathy for challenges and using supply markets in different ways. I think that's where the future of procurement is. And those that kind of embrace that journey, I think will be the ones that are the most successful.
Interesting. So it's what I like in your answer is that you don't only pay attention to these hard skills, but you give a big share of success to soft skills as well, right? Yeah,
and it's probably nothing new, but it's becoming ever more and more important every single year. And what you find, or what I hear from the procurement leaders I talk to, is that they find it harder and harder to hire those kind of people from within procurement. And so that means that for those that have those skills or develop and invest in the development of those skills, I think it will be there's a very high ROI in terms of your career for doing that. And there's also some of it that comes down to kind of the self-awareness too, that, kind of taking a step back and thinking, where do I need to develop? Where is the future of the profession going? How am I equipped? And not waiting for somebody to tell you that through a 360 survey, a performance assessment. But it's difficult. We all kind of struggle in being self-reflective.
Yeah.
But I think that would really serve folks well. It's something that I try and do in mapping where I am today versus where I think I need to go based on what I see my vision for the future of the profession.
Interesting. So invest some of the time for self-reflecting and thinking about the future directions of development, right?
Yeah, where you can evolve your own capabilities to fit in the vision of procurement. And the worst thing that will happen is that future of procurement is going to take a bit longer to get there than maybe we think. But at that point, you're already equipped. You're well equipped.
I like it. Good, Philip. Then let's come to the new topic, which is also something where you are really strong at, building the procurement community. And this is somehow what I am trying also to contribute to, building the good image and good atmosphere around procurement and popularizing the job as such. But can you tell us how do you see the role of the community for procurement professionals, and how can people benefit from one another being together in procurement?
Yeah, and I'm really obviously passionate about it, which is a reason for the show, and I know that you are too. And I loved when you had the hashtag I love procurement, because that really resonated with me, and I think it probably does with a lot of people.
Interesting.
That we're all in this together. And when I say that, I mean that we all benefit as a community for increasing our impact within the organizations that we work, because it provides a greater case for the continued investment in what we do and the continued evolution of what we do. and that there isn't going to be one day some CIO who comes and says, yeah, let's bring in the robots. So I think we're all in this together, and the community is such a strong way that we can share from each other, learn ideas, kind of open our minds, take off the blinkers a little bit, but be more transparent with each other about what we're doing, the challenges we face, how we're addressing them. Because I think that's one thing that maybe we've been taught, I know I was taught, was, this idea of information is power. And just trying to relax that a little bit so that we all can learn from each other.
Yeah.
I just think that we all benefit from that. And what's really thrilled me as I go through, as I've gone through this journey with Art of Procurement, is the openness of people within our profession to want to share with others. That's obviously what podcasts like what I do, what you do, that's one of the reasons it exists, is that other people, guests come on the show because they want to share some of their experiences and insights. And a lot of people who are, when I was starting the podcast, I would look at them and think, they've been well known in this profession for a long, long time. Why would they ever speak to me? What I've learned as I've got to know people is that there's just this insatiable appetite to give back. And I just love that about our community. So anything that I'm doing, anything that I can to continue to increase kind of how we share ideas, case studies, because that's what gives us, that curiosity across the community is what gives us the courage, the growth mindset to do different things, to challenge the status quo, to take some risks, all the things that we need to do if we're going to continue to evolve. A big part of the inspiration and motivation to do that comes from community.
Exactly. I like this comment. And one more time, a big shout out, Art of Procurement, for our listeners. It's another podcast. Wherever you listen to Future Procurement, go to Art of Procurement and check it out. You will definitely like it.
Thank you.
And subscribe and follow. Do you say it in your podcasts?
Yes.
It's good.
Yeah, it's one of the things, and I'll just this is, I guess, some inside baseball, as we'd say in the States, but subscribe. It's very difficult to get feedback when there's so much effort, so much time that goes into building podcasts like this. I never really understood that until I started doing it, especially the amount of preparation that goes into it, and it can be pretty lonely at times. And so one of the things that really helps, both in terms of motivation, but also in terms of spreading the word, because it's only as good as the reach, is to just tell others about it if you find value. From this podcast, if you like listening to Future Procurement, tell as many people as you can, because that really just helps us all connect with other people within our community, and it helps kind of spread the word.
Interesting. So romantic note that we take closer now to the end. And coming to the end of the podcast, I ask my guests to give some practical advice to our listeners, and some big ideas or some small advice, whatever you have on top of your mind right now, Philip.
I thought about it a little bit before we got on, and I came up with two things that I hear a lot from the people that I'm interviewing. The first thing is just be cognizant that you're speaking the language of the business as much as you possibly can when talking with stakeholders, because there's a trap that we all get into, and again, I'm including myself for sure in this bucket of we use our own jargon and terminology, and I do that in my show because it's something that it just is part of my own vernacular. So it takes a lot of effort to realize that people don't necessarily want to know about the intricacies of how procurement works or how procurement process works. They just want to know what's in it for them and how it's going to help them. And using it in their terms, I think, is just a really important way to break through and be to have them see you as a partner, not as somebody who's coming and is a threat. So that's one of the things. The other thing is when we're talking with stakeholders, and you'll notice both of these are around stakeholders, because I think that's one of the keys to our future is the strength of relationships with our stakeholders, and that they see value in what we're doing, because that compels them to keep coming back to us and asking us to help more. But that's to show up with insights when you meet with them that they wouldn't have on their own, or that will be difficult for them to have on their own, maybe even impossible to have on their own. Because if we don't show up with insights, then we'll always just be seen as somebody who is here to help them manage a process. And that's how they'll define the value that we bring. If we show up with insights that actually give them information that they don't have, that help them feel better informed, that they're able to make better decisions, or things that are happening in supply markets they're not aware of, then they'll see us as a business partner, not somebody just to help them through a process.
Great advice, and very interesting, and very... I just thought about this, and thinking about you now, Philip, is just a reflection. You are very, should I say, empathetic person? Is it the correct English word? That you are really very much thinking, or like being in person's shoes when delivering the message. And this all three advice, actually, I could connect somehow in this being empathetic, right? You said about data visualization, remember, here and now. You said about this thinking about stakeholders' needs, and so it's... And thank you for saying that. That's really important, because it's really difficult too. It's really easy to be... and this is something I maybe struggle with in our profession, and I'm sure it's the same in everyone's professions, is the showing up, and it's easy to have all the answers. It's not so easy when you get the reality of being on the ground and putting them into practice. And it's really important to remember that, both from how we all help each other, but also putting ourselves in the shoes of the other people who we're seeking to work with and influence. Fantastic. On this great note, I say big thank you, Philip, for your precious time.
Thank you so much, Robert. It's harder for me being on this side of the microphone than the other side of the microphone.
Was it? It's interesting. And I still feel comfortable, honestly. And it's a big pleasure for me talking to you. So thank you once again.
No, my pleasure, Robert. And I look forward to doing this again soon.
Thank you very much for being with us until the very end of this podcast episode. And special thanks to Philip Ideson, who has found his time to have this conversation together. And I really hope that we will keep in touch with Philip. I will remind you about our Here and Now hashtag. Please go to the show notes and find the TEDx talk. I have left the link in the show notes, and of course you are very welcome to connect with Philip in LinkedIn, and definitely check his podcasts wherever you listen to your podcasts. It's Art of Procurement. I also have left the link. There you will find a lot of great interviews with procurement thought leaders and some useful materials for your professional development. I'm sure you will like it. As always, please leave your feedback, send us your emails, and don't forget to share Future Procurement podcasts to your friends and colleagues. It's great to spread our network. My name is Robert Freeman, and this was Future Procurement. Talk to you soon.